Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 1 Part 5 of What If Deku Was a Viltrumite. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. The battle raged on with intensity. Neither side willing to give in. Bakugo was having a tough fight. Using his explosions and more to avoid damage, he couldn't stand still. For whenever he stopped he would be met by portals with hands coming out of them. But he couldn't charge either because the warp gate would just push him away. His goal was to defeat the villains, but that proved difficult without the element of surprise. The warp gate could move anywhere. So he either needed to catch it off guard or exploit its behavior in order to gain an advantage. Everyone looked on in awe when witnessing Bakugo's movements, for he showed next to no fault. But there was something more incredible on the battlefield. It was the battle between Izuku and the Namu. The class had only heard about what Izuku is capable of, whether it was from his own mouth or through Aizawa commenting about how he was holding back. And they have sometimes witnessed hints to said capabilities. Now, as they are witnessing the battle that was going on, they realized that even their imagination hadn't been close to the real thing. Izuku was fighting the Namu all on his own. And it was nothing short of incredible. The beast was strong and delivered powerful attacks, which Izuku mostly avoided. The green-haired boy showed his own feats of strength by delivering punches that were at least equal to that of the Namu. And he was incredibly durable. They didn't know who was winning, because both sides seemed to be equal. Amazing, Uraraka uttered in awe. For there were no other words to describe the spectacle that she was witnessing. Izuku used his flight to maneuver himself around the Namu and give himself leverage. While throwing devastating punch after punch, the Namu took it like it was nothing. As it failed to land most of its attacks, neither of them backed down, both determined to beat the other into the dirt. The two kept this slugfest going, both continuing to fight the same way that they had before, until the tide turned after just a few hits. Suddenly the Namu began to falter, as if it had reached its limit, and Izuku started controlling the battle. Everyone watching perked up upon witnessing this. For the green-haired boy was going to win. He's going to do it, Ashido shouted, excitement present in her voice. Get him, Deku, Uraraka then shouted, her voice urging Izuku to finish the fight already. It was at that moment that the green-haired boy hit the Namu in the temple, staggering it severely. Izuku didn't waste this opportunity, so he moved in. The Namu wasn't just staggered, it was injured as well. If there ever was a moment for him to end the fight, it was right now, when the beast had no means of defending. The green-haired boy closed in on the Namu at high speeds, readying his finishing blow to the head. Then a loud crash was heard, which was followed by a loud crack and a spray of red. The onlookers were now silent and wide-eyed. Normally they would be on a higher note and cheer, like they had done just a few seconds ago. But all of that quickly turned into horror when they saw what happened next. Izuku's finishing blow hadn't landed at all. The Namu had somehow been able to catch his punch before slamming him into the ground. The cracking and spraying had come from Izuku, as some of his bones broke and he coughed up blood. As the green-haired boy laid on the ground, the beast showed no mercy. It raised its arms, prompting Izuku to fly out of harm's way. He didn't get far, however, as the Namu grabbed him by the ankle and slammed him into the ground once more. The green-haired boy coughed up more blood, as the Namu then proceeded to pound him into the dirt. The onlookers were even more horrified now, as they watched the Namu beat Izuku to death. It was bloody, brutal, and they could hear his bones crack and break. Despair closed in on them even further now, for they didn't know what to do. Not even Izuku could defeat the Namu. So what chance did they have? Uraraka was among the despairing onlookers, and she didn't know what to do. Izuku was being killed by that monster, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it. She was far too weak to help in any way, and this fact made her fall into even more despair. The brown-haired girl closed her eyes, hoping that everything would be all right when she reopened them. She was nothing like Izuku, so the only thing that she could do was pray that things would work out. That is when she realized something. Izuku was the only one of them that had any hope of defeating the Namu. Despite the fact that he was losing, he didn't need help in the form of strength. He already had that covered. What he needed was a distraction. He needed something that could draw the Namu's attention away long enough for him to recuperate and turn the tide once more. Uraraka may not be able to fight alongside Izuku, but she could help him. Besides, she owed him from when he had saved her. The brown-haired girl now opened her eyes, showing an uncertain yet determined expression. As she stood up, "What are you doing?" Ashido asked, clearly jarred by the brutality she had to witness. Uraraka's legs trembled and nearly failed her, but she steadied herself enough to say, "I'm going to help him. He'll die if I don't," with a steady voice. before running off. This revelation made Ashido grow pale in the face, as she shouted, "No, don't." But Uraraka didn't listen as she just kept running. Meanwhile, Izuku was still being beaten by the Namu. The green-haired boy was on the ground, holding his arms up in a desperate attempt to guard, but it was too much. He could feel his muscles tearing and bones breaking. The pain was so severe that he came close to blacking out. But he didn't give in. He held his guard up and waited for the moment that he could break free. But the more he waited, the less likely it seemed that the moment would come. His vision started getting blurry, and he could feel his strength leave his body. Izuku was about to pass out when the Namu suddenly stopped attacking him. The green-haired boy was confused. As his vision slowly returned to him, he then turned towards the same direction that the Namu was looking, only to be terrified by what he was seeing. It was none other than his brown-haired friend, Uraraka, holding a rock and looking like she was so afraid that she was holding back tears. "Get away from him," she then shouted, before she hurled the rock at the Namu's face. The beast didn't even budge from this, but it now had its attention locked on the thrower. Uraraka could sense the malice being directed towards her and tried to escape, but it was too late. The Namu had dashed across the field and closed the distance between them in an instant. What followed after that made everyone shriek in agony. As the Namu then hit Uraraka, the brown-haired girl was thrown back an incredible distance, coughing blood and wincing in pain as she finally stopped. The damage had left her lying on the ground, unable to move. As the Namu closed in on her to finish the job, the beast towered over her, its eyes empty yet menacing, as it raised its monstrous arms high above its head, intending to crush the pathetic girl beneath it. Then it proceeded to throw its attack, which was followed by a loud crash. At first everyone was horrified, thinking that Uraraka had been killed. But when they looked, they were proven otherwise. The Namu had been slammed into the ground in a bizarre position, as if it had been suplexed from behind. They were even more shocked to see that the person who had performed the suplex was none other than Izuku, and he did not look happy. The Namu quickly got back to its feet. As its gaze was locked onto Izuku, the green-haired boy wheezed and panted heavily, but no one could tell whether it was from exhaustion or rage. His body trembled, and his eyes were that of a furious berserker. "You'll pay for that," Izuku bellowed, as he charged towards the Namu. The beast was ready to block the attack, but was thrown back immediately. It wasn't prepared for what had happened, and neither was anyone who was watching. Izuku's rage had fueled him more than anyone could have imagined, for he was now way stronger than before. Each blow threw the Namu off balance, as it sent a shockwave across the facility. Everyone was affected by this. Even those who were fighting stopped to see what was going on. The battle had officially become completely one-sided, with Izuku on the winning side. Eventually the Namu was knocked onto the ground, where the green-haired boy began pounding it the same way that it had done to him. Everyone's expression quickly turned into one of horror once more, for Izuku didn't stop attacking, even after bones started breaking, even after blood began spewing everywhere, even after it stopped moving. Izuku didn't stop wailing his blows onto its head. They didn't know what to think of it. He defeated the Namu, but he did it in one of the most brutal ways. Eventually the rush ended, and the pain came back to the green-haired boy. It was at this moment that he stopped attacking and looked at what he had done. What was left of the Namu's head was a red ocean of blood, with pink and gory islands floating in the middle of it. Izuku was disgusted by the sight, but that was the last thing that he felt before pain and exhaustion finally took him over as he fell to the ground unconscious. Everyone had been observing this final burst of rage, including the remaining villains. Both Shigaraki and Kirigiri were among those, which didn't go unnoticed by Bakugo. The blonde took advantage of this, as he charged towards the villains with full force. They didn't notice him until he was almost at point-blank range, and by that time it was too late. Bakugo grinned maniacally, as he raised one of his grenade gauntlets and bellowed, "Die!" Before pulling the pin, a massive fireball shot out from the gauntlet, engulfing both villains as it did. The blonde grinned in satisfaction upon witnessing this, but that grin vanished when he realized that Kirigiri had blocked most of the attack. This revelation also made Bakugo cold sweat, for if the warp gate had blocked it, it could only mean the blonde didn't get to finish his thoughts, as a fiery explosion suddenly engulfed his entire body. Kirigiri hadn't just blocked most of the explosion. He opened a portal to redirect towards Bakugo. The blonde winced in pain as he was thrown back, struggling to get back up once he finally stopped. Normally this is where Shigaraki would have rushed in to kill Bakugo when he was weakened, but he couldn't. Kirigiri wasn't fast enough to block the entire explosion. Some of it made it past him, And that little piece happened to land on a vital spot and therefore put the hand-covered villain out of commission. Kurogiri was now at a crossroad. His decision is what will decide the outcome of the future. What he assumed to be the strongest of the students were out of commission, so he could stay and fight. The problem was that backup could arrive at any given moment, and there was no way for them to win with both Shigaraki and the Namu out of the game. When all of the factors were fully considered, the choice seemed obvious. The battle was lost, so the best they could do was retreat. The Black Gate grabbed onto the hand-covered villain before teleporting away from the area. Just a few minutes after he vanished, the gates of the USJ flew open, revealing none other than All Might. The blonde hero was immediately confused by what he saw, for it seemed the battle was already over. It wasn't until he walked in and got a better look that his confusion quickly turned into worry. What he saw on the battlefield were the injured bodies of Bakugo, Izuku, and Uraraka. The hero was gripped by horror, but also by self-hatred. This might not have happened if he had been here sooner, but he ran out of time. He was late, and his students had to suffer because of it. The police and more pro-heroes were quick to arrive at the scene. The villains were arrested, the uninjured students were questioned, and the injured were either taken to a hospital or the infirmary. Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka were all taken to the infirmary, where Recovery Girl would treat them. The reason for them being taken there was that their injuries weren't as severe as that of Aizawa and 13, so they could be treated at campus. The only one of the three that would qualify for hospital care was Izuku, but after an examination it was found that it wouldn't be necessary. Turns out that on top of all the powers that he already had, Izuku also had an enhanced healing factor. The trio eventually woke up, all grunting in pain at the same time. "I feel like every bone in my body is broken," Izuku commented, grunting heavily as he did. Recovery Girl heard this and responded by saying, "Oh, I'm sure that most of them were," with a rather dull voice. Izuku just grunted even more upon hearing this, before saying, "Well, that can't be good," with a voice that attempted to be comedic despite the pain. The trio were then silent for a moment, until Izuku noticed that he wasn't the only patient in the room. He turned his gaze towards Uraraka before asking, "Are you okay?" with a concerned voice. The brown-haired girl looked a little sick, as she answered by saying, "Yeah, this is nothing," with a voice that clearly was pained, yet attempted to be reassuring. Izuku did not bite, and responded by saying, "That doesn't look like nothing," with a concerned voice. Uraraka looked down upon hearing this, for she couldn't trick Izuku into thinking that she was okay. That is when the green-haired boy took the opportunity to say, "Hey, thanks for saving me. I wouldn't have made it without you." With a broad smile, Uraraka smiled upon hearing this, as she looked at Izuku and said, "No problem, we're even now," with a more joyous tone. The two giggled after this, but their moment was interrupted by the furious growls that came from across the room. Everyone turned to see that it was Bakugo, covered from head to toe with burn marks. "What the hell happened to you? Did you get spit roasted or something?" Izuku then asked, sounding both concerned and comedic. Bakugo just got infuriated upon hearing this, as he angrily shouted, "Shut up!" Both Izuku and Uraraka giggled upon hearing this, but they stopped when the infirmary door suddenly flung open. "I am here," a booming voice shouted, prompting everyone to look and see. It was All Might, and he didn't look as happy as he usually did. The blonde hero walked up to the trio before bowing and saying, "Young Bakugo, young Midoriya, and young Uraraka, allow me to apologize. It is my fault that the three of you were injured. This wouldn't have happened if I had been there when I was supposed to. I'm sorry." With a very sorry voice. The trio were both shocked and surprised to see this. It's not every day that you get to see All Might apologizing. Even rarer to see him apologize for something that wasn't his fault. The teens were unsure of how to respond, until Bakugo spoke up. "Raise your head, All Might. It's not your fault that these idiots nearly got themselves killed," the blonde said, sounding as aggressive as he usually did. Everyone looked at Bakugo in surprise. What he said matched up with something that he would say, but at the same time they were surprised to hear him tell this to All Might. Everyone remained silent for a long while, until it was broken by Recovery Girl, who cleared her throat before saying, "You have visitors," as she slid the infirmary door open to reveal the remainder of Class 1A. The trio was surprised to see this, as their classmates swarmed them with worry and questions. Everyone was worried for all three of them, and they all praised them for how heroic they were. Izuku smiled awkwardly, while scratching the back of his head, due to the embarrassment that he was feeling. "Can't take a little praise, can you?" a voice then said, which prompted everyone to go quiet. The majority of the people in the room did not recognize this voice, but a few did. One of those few was Izuku, That's why he looked surprised long before anyone turned to see that the person who had spoken was Omni-Man, Ashido exclaimed in shock, which perfectly mirrored what everyone else was feeling. Omni-Man, the unlicensed hero who helped many countries at once, was right there in front of them. Who wouldn't be shocked? The silence, however, was broken by Izuku, who instinctively exclaimed, "Dad," without thinking. Now the room was dead silent, so silent that you could possibly hear a pin drop on the ground. Everyone turned their wide eyes towards Izuku, all thinking that they had misheard him. His reaction would only prove otherwise. Everyone was silent for a long, long while, until it was finally broken when Ashido shouted, "What? Outro. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates." Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video. So goodbye and have a divine day.